On a cold night in March 1944, captured Allied airmen broke out through a secret tunnel from a prison camp the Nazis thought was escape-proof. Their breakout was immortalized in The Great Escape, a famous movie starring Steve McQueen.
Interesting idea. How many are you taking out?
250.
250?
Yeah.
You're crazy.
The group of airmen had spent months digging 3 tunnels to freedom. A few of the men are alive today to tell the tale.
If you're claustrophobic, you're in deep trouble. You're in stygian darkness and 30 feet in the sand. That's when you kind of wondered sometimes, what in the hell am I doing here?
The atmosphere was fraught. We knew that the Germans were certain that there was a tunnel. And the gamble was who would get there first, the Germans or us. The Germans to find it or us to get out.
As a cat-and-mouse game, it was deadly serious, with the Nazis determined to make escape impossible. "60 years later, archaeologists have located the remains of the camp and are trying to recover some of the ingenious devices made by the POWs.
Somebody's made that to escape from this camp. And it's there.
Yeah, it's hidden.
And we're the only people who have seen this since 1945.
Where prisoners once used bare hands, archaeologists will use backhoes to hunt for a secret escape tunnel the Germans never found. With veterans who worked on the tunnels watching, the excavation will reveal the incredible exploits of the prisoners.
I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever get to see something like this.
And for them to do that with 30 feet of sand above them, you come away with a lot of respect for those guys.
Up next on Nova, a classic tale of courage and ingenuity, the real Great Escape.
Corporate funding for NOVA is provided by Sprint and Microsoft. Additional funding is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Beneath the trees of this forest, tangled in the roots, lie the clues to a dark past. This was the site of Stalag Luft III, one of the most notorious prisoner of war camps run by the Nazis. At the height of the Second World War, these woods echoed with the sound of young Allied airmen who had been shot down over enemy territory. They came from Holland and Poland, Canada and Scandinavia, Britain and the United States. They shared a common goal: to escape at any cost. And what they planned here was the boldest mass escape of all, the Great Escape. The story begins in 1942, when the Allied bombing offensive over Nazi-occupied territories was intensifying. The air crews flying these missions knew their chances of being shot down were high. If they survived bailing out, they were usually caught. One of these flyers was a highly decorated bomber pilot from Arizona, Davy Jones.
I was in North Africa, in Tunisia, and I was hit by flak. Pretty well tore the airplane up, but all of the crew were able to evacuate the airplane if he weren't thrown out. And within 20 minutes as we walked north, a squad of German infantrymen appeared, and the classic words, "For you, the war is over."
Davy Jones, along with the rest of his crew, was transported to Germany to become a prisoner of war.
The Germans had hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners of war to deal with, many more than they ever expected. And they were hoping that they could put them all in massive camps and just leave them be. Unfortunately for the Germans, these airmen were not willing to sit by quietly. And so they became a rather serious escape problem. So around about 1942, the Germans decided, well, maybe we should take all of these troublemakers and put them in one place.
The Germans created a top security camp called Stalag Luft 3. Built near the town of Sagen in German-occupied Poland, the camp's location was ideal. Any escapees would have to travel hundreds of miles to reach freedom. It was designed to be the Nazis' most escape-proof prison. Huts were raised off the ground so that the guards could spot any tunneling activity. And the perimeter fence was built far away from the buildings, so tunnels would have to be even longer. Most escapes failed, but one would make Stalag Luft 3 famous forever. Today, the scattered remains of the camp have been found in this forest. Beneath the ground, archaeologists hope to discover traces of a tunnel dug for the mass breakout. It's the first time Stalag Luft 3 has been excavated, and the goal is to recover material evidence of the battle of wits that led to the Great Escape.
Yeah, this is 122. This is 122. There's absolutely no doubt that we've simply come across from there, so now we're this one to this one.
Peter Doyle and Larry Babbitts, the team leaders, are using aerial photographs and maps left behind by the prisoners. They've located the remains of a hut, beneath which they believe lies a secret tunnel.
We've got the shaft down. We know we've got this chamber right beneath the building. Yeah. And we know that all we've got is a very small tunnel.
The tunnel is thought to be 30 feet down, so it's going to be hard to find. They will need to dig a massive hole. Peter and Larry hope that the dig will bring them closer to understanding what motivated the men of Stalag Luft 3 to tunnel their way to freedom.
The psychology of being a prisoner is you're more interested in the stuff that's outside, right? Yeah. Getting out. And we're trying to get in a manner of speaking, not just into the camp and find things, but get into the mind of the people who were here, because archaeologists are really looking at what people were doing.
Most POWs were obsessed with finding the best way out. One of them was Charles Houpert, a pilot from Indiana who still thinks about escape.
The first thing I always look at, even today when I go in a room, I stop at the door, I go in and look if there's any other exits. You never know what's going to happen.
In fact, escape attempts were the obligation of every Allied officer.
You were not out of the war, you were still fighting for your country, you were in uniform. And although you went in the firing line, it was still your duty to carry the war on as best you could.
Individual escapes were an irritation to the Germans, but a mass breakout could tie up thousands of troops. In January 1943, former skiing champion Roger Bushell began plotting the ultimate escape. The plan was to dig 3 tunnels simultaneously, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. If one were discovered, there would still be 2 in reserve. The tunnels would need to be dug over 300 feet long to pass under the perimeter wire and into the forest 20 feet beyond it. This would allow 200 people to escape on a single night. Hiding such a massive operation from the watchful eyes of the German guards would not be easy. The prisoners devised early warning signals to alert each other whenever guards approached. British bombardier Alan Bryant was one of those signalers.
On Monday, the sign would be that you would start playing with your left-hand shoelace. And the following day, it would be you'd be playing with your ear as though you've got something wrong with your ear. The third day, it might be you're overtaken with... you know, all quite simple, common things. They were quite surreptitious. I mean, it was done very, very cleverly. And never let us down, never let us down.
Playing cat and mouse with the German guards became a way of life for prisoners like Walter Morrison.
It was a game, a sport. It was more like a sort of traditional English field sport in its way. It was played by the rules. Both sides understood them.
Because of the Geneva Convention, escaped prisoners were not overly concerned about getting caught.
Under the Geneva Convention, which was the international agreement which covered the treatment of POWs, there was simply a short prison sentence stipulated if you escaped and were captured. Typically, you would have 10 days in solitary confinement. The prisoners and the guards, they were obviously on opposite sides, and they were doing whatever they could to frustrate each other. But I think there was a considerable degree of respect between the two sides.
Prisoners often fraternized with their guards, who were from the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. One even appeared in a play. But the jolly interplay between both sides would not last forever. What began as a game became deadly serious. In the spring of '43, the prisoners started work on their tunnels. To avoid being seen underneath the huts, they cut through the building supports and made clever disguises for the tunnel entrances. Tom went from the dark corner of a hut corridor. Harry began under a stove. A tiled base was lifted to one side, revealing the top of the tunnel shaft. Dick started in a washroom beneath the drain cover. Hiding the tunnel entrance in a sump where dirty water collected was a masterstroke. The Germans never did find Dick. But perhaps the archaeologists will have more luck.
The thing that started it right here, I think, are again trying to get terracotta pipe.
In the remains of the washroom where they think Dick began, they've uncovered what looks like a drainage sump.
Of the concrete there, and we can see where the terracotta pipes fit.
They want to find clues that confirm this is no ordinary washroom drain.
So it's right up against this brick here.
The water at the bottom of the sump was a brilliant disguise for the tunnel entrance. It made the trapdoor to Dick almost invisible. The prisoners made their own movable concrete slab, which slid out when they needed to climb down the tunnel shaft. Just a few inches below the surface, the archaeologists discover something that makes their hearts skip a beat.
Whoa.
But what is it? I mean,
it's got a rounded, it's actually got rounded edges to it. Just lift it. Just take that out. Oh no, look at that.
This is
That's almost a perfect fit. Look, it's that wide, so it's the width of the sump.
This was the door in the sump.
It's got to be,
wow.
isn't it? They would have to seal it up.
Immediately, Larry and Peter grasped the significance of what is no ordinary concrete slab.
Was really
this is the door. This is the door.
That is amazing. So this
wow.
This proves it's here, isn't it? There's no doubt.
Wow.
Once the prisoners had created the trap doors, they were ready to start digging the tunnels. But there was a major problem to overcome. The experience of guarding Allied troublemakers had taught the German guards to be vigilant. They even buried microphones around the perimeter of the camp to detect digging. This forced the prisoners to dig a vertical shaft 38 feet down before tunneling out toward freedom, deep enough to be out of range of the microphones. This was no job for claustrophobics. Ken Reese was one of the first to be recruited.
The room I went into was a room of keen escapers and people who had quite experience on tunnels. And Johnny Bull, who became a great mate of mine, invited me onto his digging team. So I was lucky enough to get in on the ground floor, as it were. I think they thought because I was a Welshman I must be good at mining or something.
In the early days of Stalag Luft 3, there was only a handful of captured American pilots. Among them was Davy Jones, who became a tunneler on Dick.
We consider ourselves the elite, if you will, of the group. And it turned out there were really only three Yanks, three of us, who worked underground. And so we were rightfully proud of that fact.
As the archaeologists dig deeper, another problem emerges that was all too familiar to the tunnelers on the Great Escape. Below the tree roots and topsoil, there was nothing but sand. The Germans deliberately located Stalag Luft 3 in this area of sandy soil. Any bright golden sand on the surface would be a telltale sign of tunneling activity. Diggers had to change their clothes every time they went underground.
So they had some long johns, and they were clammy, wet, sandy, grubby, terrible. That's one of the worst parts of the whole experience of digging, was get into those, you strip off and get into a long john to go to work. You went in, and then they sealed you in, because they'd only take sand out at certain times. You'd go in the hole, and in the early days, we'd stay there all day. That was sort of the routine.
It was so cramped, there was not even enough room to turn around. So diggers worked in teams of two.
The main digger, he'd go forward, and you'd go up the tunnel to him backwards, so that you were feet to feet. You were facing down the tunnel and he was facing forward.
Although the soft sand was easy to dig, there was always the danger of collapse. Tunnels had to be shored up using wooden boards.
Put a board in and put one side and then the other, and then you put the top board into a notch, and then you pack the sand on all three sides, and that would be one frame. And you repeat that.
As the tunnels grew longer, the prisoners made a personal sacrifice to find enough timber.
Each bunk bed had originally 20 bedboards on it, and the taking of bedboards was continuous. Just before the escape, my memory serves me right, we were down to something like 8 bedboards each, which I would tell you is damned uncomfortable, actually, to sleep on.
We got our wood wherever we could. We would get it out of the barracks, and those poor barracks, I wondered why they didn't fall down, because all the bracing in the attics were practically taken out.
The 2-foot bedboards dictated the dimensions of the tunnels, 1 board high and 1 board wide. Even with the wooden shoring, tunnelers were always at risk of being buried alive.
I was only involved in one fall. My head was covered, but my number 2 pulled me out fairly quickly. Could be a bit worrying, you know, because you were down, 30 feet down. No one knew from the German side where you were, what you were doing, and so if there'd been any nasty fall, you realized that you just about had it.
That's when you kind of wondered sometimes, what in the hell am I doing here? You're in Stygian darkness and 30 feet in sand. And if you're claustrophobic, you're in deep trouble.
As the hole gets deeper and wider, the archaeologists are starting to experience how treacherous and unpredictable sand can be.
Sand is dangerous, and what we're facing now is something that the tunnelers, when they did the Great Escape, had to face. It's the same problem on a larger scale that the tunnelers had. How do you keep all this sand with the tremendous weight above it from coming down?
Today, disposing of the sand is easy. Trucks cart it all away. But when the tunnels were dug, sand disposal had to be carried out in secret. One slip-up, and the entire operation would be exposed. Prisoners came up with a novel solution: trouser bags made from socks, from which sand could be discreetly scattered. The sand sprinklers became known as penguins.
Now, to be a penguin was this: you went across to where the tunnel was and filled up your socks with sand. But if you had too much sand put into your sock, then you waddled, and it was called being a penguin. And then, of course, the guards saw you were a penguin and said, that chap's up to no good, and would search you. And therefore, the secret was that the people put in the sand in didn't put too much in. Having done that, you then walked around the camp. The prisoners were encouraged to cultivate their own little garden, and if I was a penguin, I would go up and talk to him, because while he was raking over his little plot of land, I was admiring his tomatoes, but he was actually, in fact, raking in the sand, little dodges like that. But sand was a terrible problem.
And the sand remains a problem as the backhoe struggles to shift it. But on the surface above, the archaeologists think they have uncovered proof that the concrete slab they found is Dick's trap door.
This, I think, is a significant find, very significant find, because what we've got on the slab are a couple of quite deep holes, slots, and those slots must really be to let in this slab into the side of the sump. And so this, most likely, is going to be a tool for letting in that slab, and it fits absolutely perfect.
Look at the upper side. We got a brazen that runs up right here at the top, and it's abraded there.
Yeah, as you can see, it's going to have to pull it out like that,
yeah,
which then is going to wear this thing back down, isn't it?
And
pull it out and then like this.
Lifting hooks would have been essential to haul up the trap door from its tight-fitting slot in the washroom drain. The German guards carried out surprise searches, so the prisoners had to be able to close the tunnel entrance quickly.
The tunnel was only open for about 10 minutes, rather like when racing cars go into a pit stop and the thing stops and everyone does his job like that very, very quickly, and it could be done open and closed in about 10 minutes. It had to be done quickly because the Germans were wandering around, not maybe only one or two Germans, were wandering around in every hut all the time, so you had to be slick.
As the tunnels grew longer, the stakes became higher than ever. The prisoners were increasingly concerned about keeping their operations secret. They had amassed a huge amount of escape equipment, scavenged or stolen from all over the camp. The Germans later drew up an astonishing list of things that had disappeared. 4,000 bedboards, 34 chairs, 52 tables, 90 double-tier bunk beds, and 1,700 blankets to muffle underground sounds. But the most useful escape item was the powdered milk can sent to prisoners by the Red Cross. They were known as Klim, milk spelt backwards. Over 1,400 were used. Charles Hupert became an expert in turning tin cans into tools.
We used Klim tins for everything that we made because you could cut the ends out and have a large piece of tin to work with. You can straighten that out flat and join them together in a lock joint such as this, and take your wooden mallet and hammer them down. Then you take your backside of a knife and bear down on that with a lot of pressure on both sides of that crimp so that the tin will not separate. In order to make the tools that are used in the tunnels, the digging tools, the funnels, and the lamps to give light.
The archaeologists have found an object that could have been made from one of Charles Hupert's cans.
Okay, what is it? It's metal.
So that's well, there's some kind of handle.
Yeah.
And that's
don't pull that out. Let's.
Does the wire go all the way around it?
But look how thick the corrosion is here.
All the way around from there. It's
but this isn't really corroded.
Just take that off.
It's kind of flimsy for a ladle. I wouldn't think of it as being
you wouldn't be able to shift sand with that.
You know, you couldn't really use it for a scoop.
What's that black?
Wait, where?
That's got to be a lamp, isn't it?
And there's a wick.
These lamps burned mutton fat, skimmed off the greasy soup served in the camp kitchen. With candles in short supply, it was a brilliant innovation.
Then we installed a wick. We usually found someone that had worn out a pair of pajamas that had cord, or made out of cotton, and then we would drop that in there.
But the longer the tunnels became, the less oxygen there was at the end. The mutton fat lamps were going out, and the tunnelers were suffocating. So the prisoners devised a way to pump fresh air into the tunnels. Walter Morrison helped with the design.
The air pump was a fascinating device, but it needed quite an array of materials. There were two sides of beds, two ends of beds, 4 ice hockey sticks, 4 ping-pong bats, 2 kit bags with 9 coat hooks, empty powdered milk tins.
It was designed to pump air on both the forwards and backwards strokes, preserving the energy of the pumper. These photos were taken later by German guards. Fresh air was sucked into the air pump along a line of clim tins going down the shaft. It was piped under the floor of the tunnel through another row of tins. Shortly after the air pump was installed, the task of moving sand up and down the tunnel was also transformed by an amazing feat of engineering. Underground railways complete with a changeover station, where diggers could switch trains to reach the second half of the tunnel. Between April and September 1943, the prisoners used the railway to remove at least 130 tons of sand. But however ingenious their inventions, the prisoners could not make everything themselves. Some items had to be acquired from the German guards by blackmail.
The prisoners had access to something that the guards didn't, and that was Red Cross food. Chocolate, coffee, soap, tea, raisins, sugar, things like this. A lot of these things had not been available in Germany in the civilian economy for years. So it turned out that most guards were willing to do almost anything to get themselves a couple of bars of soap or a package of coffee, even to the point of smuggling in a camera or loaning their identity papers so they could be forged, or bringing in pieces of a typewriter, this sort of thing.
Several months into the digging, an audacious theft completely changed life underground. 2 sharp-eyed prisoners stole some wire from German workmen and installed lighting in the tunnel, tapping into the camp's electrical supply.
You want to move your hand back for a second? I'm just trying to get a picture.
Digging around the drain, the archaeologists may have found evidence of this primitive wiring.
What kind of metal does that appear to be? Is it copper?
No, it's a tin of some kind, but it hasn't decayed. It's not steel, it's not iron or steel.
But is it regular? What's the sheathing like? Is it a regular looking
sheathing
one?
does not. It looks homemade.
We dug down through the bottom of the concrete floor. Now, this is a washroom. You're not going to have electrical cable under a washroom. It just doesn't make any sense. So the bottom line is that if we've got electrical cable here, it's either been put in after the war, or it was electrical cable that was put in by the escapers. I mean, those are the only 2 possibilities, really.
The prisoners strung bulbs along the entire length of Tom, Dick, and Harry. Riding through the tunnels had become a spectacular experience. But as the big night of the escape drew near, the German guards were becoming increasingly suspicious. And the prisoners had a new worry. They were running out of places to dump sand. They decided to focus their efforts on tunnels Tom and Harry, and refill most of Dick with sand from the other 2. But Tunnel Dick would still play a vital role in the build-up to the escape. By now, there were over 600 prisoners involved in this clandestine operation. Special forgery teams worked on ensuring a safe passage across Germany after the escape. While tailors made homemade insignia for escape clothes, artists forged elaborate identity papers. With hundreds of passes and disguises coming off the camp production line, a secure location to hide them was vital. Dick, with its secret entrance, was the perfect hiding place. So it was turned into a storage room. And near the entrance, the archaeologists uncover an amazing artifact that may have been kept there.
It's a stamp. It's got a Wehrmacht symbol on it.
Oh, and yeah, is it the same rubber stuff that we were just looking at?
Yeah, that is amazing.
This,
look,
this is unbelievable. Look at that. You can even see the feathering on the ends of the eagle's wing.
That's the Ausweis, isn't it? That's to get me out.
Yeah, this is a stamp that you'd put over a guy's picture on an Ausweis. Never in my wildest dreams that I thought we'd see a forger's stamp. I mean, everybody talks about them and things like that, but I just never would have thought that we'd come up with one.
This stamp is a forgery, the first to be recovered from one of the tunnels. It was painstakingly carved from the only available source of rubber.
I had my flying boots with me, and I remember a chap coming round and taking my boots away. When I got them back, the rubber heels had been taken off, and there were wooden heels there, because the rubber heel was used to make rubber stamps, which you could then cut a swastika out or various other German emblems to put stamps on passes.
Just as this tantalizing find is uncovered, Davy Jones, Jimmy James, and Charles Hupert returned to Stalag Luft 3 for the first time to see the tunnel they worked on 60 years ago.
Come on. Macro. Oh, come on. Gee, Merry Christmas.
Are you down to the level of Dick now, more or less?
Yes, we're right down at the level of Dick. That's the bottom of Dick.
So we're in the tunnel itself, hopefully.
After 2 days of excavating, the backhoes have finally dug down to 30 feet. The engineers have inserted a steel frame to protect the archaeologists as they work. Delicately scraping through the sand, they begin to uncover the remains of Tunnel Dick.
Well, what we've got is the tunnel itself, 30 foot down. And the exciting thing is, you've got these timbers, brownish material, and the timbers showing the edge of the wall. You can see a very nice straight line now. And then over in the corner there, we're starting to pick out rust. It's bits of tin that have been taken into the tunnel. So we're actually seeing here the escape tunnel as it was being constructed.
And you can see right as you go along here, they put boards in there from the beds.
Although the roof of the tunnel has collapsed, the outline of the decomposed bedboards can still be seen.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
How did you fit in this?
Well, you could get as far as your elbows, and then you reached up to dig, and then you put the board up, and then you pack the sand around it.
But sir,
to hold
you're
it in place.
90-some years old, and your shoulders are too broad to fit in here now.
The archaeologists have also found original Klim tins, which supplied air to the diggers. Amazingly, they are still in place on the floor of the collapsed tunnel.
Do you remember these tins?
Oh, sure. Must be a Klim tin. Well, I don't think any doubt about that. Yeah.
How many do you think you used?
Quite a bunch of them.
Too many?
Yeah, but we had more of those than anything else, so.
Yes.
Yes, I remember going down there about 60 years ago, straight down like that.
Can you remember? Is this familiar to you, gentlemen?
I can't believe it.
Do you think was that there?
That was it.
Was that in the dirt? Come on.
Yeah. Can you remember how it was put in?
You slid down the side.
Because we found this hook.
Okay.
That fits into the slab.
You guys can stand right there and know that in 1944 you stood right there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, incredible. How long did it take you to get from the top to the bottom?
Well, it depends how fast you went, but
How fast you were.
or how fast you went.
As the tunnels advanced, so did the Allied war effort. The tide was beginning to turn. Up in the skies over Europe, the full might of the United States Air Force was now raining bombs over Hitler's Germany. But the daylight missions proved costly for U.S. bomber squadrons, and thousands of airmen were captured by the Germans. There were so many new POWs arriving at Stalag Luft 3 that the Germans announced plans to build a new compound just for Americans. Worried that American prisoners would miss out on the Great Escape, the diggers doubled their efforts on Tunnel Tom. The increased activity aroused suspicion. One day, a surprise search revealed what the guards were looking for: the entrance to Tunnel Tom. The Germans, convinced they had foiled a massive escape, took a number of photographs to celebrate their good fortune. They had no idea there were 2 other tunnels left. Shortly afterwards, the American flyers were all transferred to their new compound.
I didn't like it because all the work that I had done was for naught. And but there was nothing you could do about it, so you have to accept it.
With the Germans on high alert, the prisoners left behind were desperate to finish Tunnel Harry. British flyer Jack Lyon, responsible for tunnel security, received a tip-off that the Germans knew the digging had not stopped.
The atmosphere was fraught. We knew that the Germans were certain that there was a tunnel. And the gamble was who would get there first, the Germans or us, the Germans to find it or us to get out.
By the middle of March 1944, Tunnel Harry was finished. The prisoners were raring to go, but had to wait over a week for the first moonless night. At last, on Friday, March 24th, the fateful moment arrived. One by one, the nervous escapers showed up at the hut. It was a strict pecking order, beginning with the men who were thought to have the best chance of eluding capture. Further down the list were men like Alan Bryant, who had gotten their place by lottery.
They wanted on that night for as many people to get out as possible. I might only get 5 or 10, 15 miles, but if I could get up and hide up in a barn or lay in a haystack or something like that, it would confuse the Germans as to just how many had got out, while the real escapers who went by train were really making their proper escapes.
At 10:30 p.m., at the top of the vertical shaft, digger Johnny Bull cut through the last few inches of soil and breathed in fresh air. Finally, after 11 months of hard work, the Great Escape was underway. Johnny Bull was the first man to taste freedom. But there was a snag. The tunnel was slightly short. It had cleared the perimeter fence, but had not reached the woods. Anyone emerging from the hole could be spotted by the German guards patrolling the fence every few minutes. For a moment, the plan seemed doomed. Then word came back to use a rope as a signaling device. From the cover of the woods, 2 tugs meant the coast was clear. Back at the hut, the next batch of escapees was sent down into the tunnel. Each man took roughly 10 minutes to make his way to the exit shaft. Everything seemed to go according to plan. But on the stroke of midnight, disaster struck.
There was an air raid. Not an unusual occurrence, but of all the things the RAF did, it was, I thought, well, that was a bit, they would pick tonight.
All the searchlights went out, the lights went out in the hut, and the lights which had been rigged up in the tunnel from the hut went out as well. And so between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, virtually no one got out.
Eventually, the air raid ended, and the lights went back on. Now the escape could continue. By 2 a.m., only 38 prisoners had made it through the tunnel. Number 39 was Jimmy James.
Of course, it was a very exciting moment, escaping by this enormous tunnel, which is about 600 worked on for a year. I was pulled up to the exit and looked up 30 feet up the shaft, and the stars were up above.
But with all the delays, progress was much slower than anticipated. Fewer than a dozen men per hour were making it through the tunnel. At 5 a.m., after a mix-up with the rope signal, the 77th man emerging from the tunnel was spotted by a guard. Ken Reese, who was next in line to escape, heard it all from the bottom of the exit shaft.
I heard the shot and realized straight away what had happened. So I backed up very quickly. By this time, the trolleys were forgotten as it were. So we were left with just a case of crawling back. At the time, it sounds silly, I suppose now, I was afraid that perhaps a German would come down the tunnel and shoot up the tunnel. And I didn't feel I wanted another bullet at that end.
Ken Reese was the last man to make it back. The last man in Tunnel Harry. Back in the hut, the men were frantically hiding the evidence. The guards were on their way, and no one wanted to be caught with fake passes and other contraband.
We started a number of bonfires, and in the hut there were small bonfires going on with chaps burning up maps and diagrams and money and documents. It was only a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, but by the time the Germans got in, a lot of it was charred. I have never seen men so annoyed. They were absolutely livid, livid. It was quite obvious that it was a big escape, and the Germans discovered to their horror that 76 people had disappeared, and then all hell was let loose.
Everyone caught was put in solitary confinement, including Ken Reese.
We were bitterly disappointed after all the work. Foolishly enough, we thought, you know, this is our chance to get home.
And I think the reaction of most of us caught was, we got so close to freedom, we weren't going to get back home, but so close to a few days out in the open, and we've lost it.
Wearing civilian clothing, many of the 76 men who had made it out were on their way to local railway stations, hoping to catch trains across Europe. Each escape party was led by a fluent German speaker, who would do all the talking if they needed to buy tickets or show their identity cards. Jimmy James was heading for the village of Cheesdorf with a group of 12 other escapees.
Here's the railway line. Yeah. This must be the old, the old platform, I don't know.
Remarkably, no one recognized Jimmy's party as escaped prisoners, and they were able to buy 12 train tickets. In short order, they were en route for Czechoslovakia. Meanwhile, the Germans had mounted a massive search.
Every auxiliary soldier, every auxiliary policeman was mobilized in the camp area. So probably within 24 hours of the tunnel being discovered, there were perhaps 60 or 70,000 extra troops who had been brought on board and were around the camp, beating through the forests, looking in the bushes, trying to find these 76 airmen.
But the escaped prisoners traveling by train were already long gone, fanning out across German territory. Jimmy James's party made it as far as the Czech border, where they were arrested and thrown into cells. Jimmy was separated from his group and handed over to the SS, who drove him to a different camp.
The SS officer told me to get out. He said, Herr James, this is a nice place. You will not escape from here. And I came face to face with our senior British officer on the escape. And I said, hello, sir, where are we? In Colditz? He said, no. He said, this is Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The only way out of here is up the chimney.
Against incredible odds, Jimmy managed to tunnel out of the concentration camp. He was recaptured after 14 days on the run and remained a prisoner until the end of the war. Just 3 of the great escapers reached freedom. Norwegians Per Bergslund and Jan Müller stowed away on a freighter to Sweden, while Dutchman Bob van der Stok traveled by train and foot to Gibraltar. Everyone else was rounded up by the Germans within 2 weeks. They assumed they'd be reunited with their friends back at Stalag Luft 3, since the Geneva Convention forbids harming escaped prisoners. But a terrible war crime was about to be committed.
It was several days before we found out about casualties. We didn't realize that people had been killed. Then we started to find out.
We got the news because the Gestapo man came across and said that so many of the prisoners who escaped from Stalag Luft 3 have been recaptured. They have tried another escape and have been shot and killed. And the senior British officer said, how many have been injured in this second escape? And the answer was none.
The Germans themselves said that they were shot while trying to re-escape, etc., but of course this was rubbish.
The Great Escape had incensed Hitler, who insisted all the recaptured prisoners be executed to set an example. His generals persuaded him to reduce the number to 50. The airmen were handed over to the Gestapo, driven to remote locations, and shot.
It shocked us at the time. Not so much the loss of life, but how it had occurred. If those chaps had actually been mown down by a guard with a machine gun as they ran, we possibly would have accepted it. But to line them up against the wall and just give the old, you know, connectious, I mean, that was something different. That's not playing by the rules.
I was devastated because in my room, Johnny Bull, who I'd been with the whole time, who started me with the tunnel, and I was on his team, he was one of the 50 who was shot. Kind of when I was back in my bunk, I would look across to his bunk and think, God, you know, he had been shot down, and had the baby born afterwards, so that he had not seen. And I just couldn't get over the fact that he was never going to go home, never going to see his wife again and child.
After the war, most of the Gestapo agents responsible for these murders were hunted down to face war crime tribunals. The Luftwaffe colonel at Stalag Luft 3 was so appalled by the action of the Gestapo that he allowed the prisoners to build a memorial to the 50 outside the camp.
Rogers up there, fourth one down on the left. Yeah.
Bud B. Green's here, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, she's there.
There's Kirby's. Valenta.
Yeah, she's a Czech.
Stour and Williams.
We were outraged and, of course, saddened. And some people he knew quite well. They're my roommate.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the sandpiper, but it spins the cut. Coming back and actually looking at it, you look at those names and think you knew them all, and you think, well, why isn't my name up there as well? Or it's just luck, fortune of war.
From the memorial, the veterans return to get one final look at the tunnel. Even with a support frame, it has become too dangerous to dig on any further. The archaeologists decide to call off the excavation and refill the hole.
You've got to treat these things with respect. These things can collapse any time, crush the timbers, and collapse on the men, and it would be incredibly difficult to get anybody that's digging a tunnel out of here.
Tunnels are scary things, and when you do them in sand, they can be really scary. I was scared out here working in the open with sky over me, and for them to do that with 30 feet of sand above them, you come away with a lot of respect for those guys.
For archaeologists and veterans alike, this dig has reminded everyone of the incredible achievement of the Great Escape.
I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever get to see something like this.
I poo-pooed the thing until yesterday. I didn't believe it until I saw it.
60 years after the most famous escape in history, the remains of the last tunnel would be buried forever.
Winter-loving, dog-biting, pigeon-fighting wild parrots from Brooklyn. I'm Robert Krulwich for Nova. We'll be right back.
Corporate funding for Nova is provided by Sprint and Microsoft. Additional funding is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Yeah, they're parrots, but what are they doing in Brooklyn?
Wow, Brooklyn, they have parrots living on the street.
That's the last place I would think to find a parrot in Brooklyn.
And yet, if you look around, you will see hundreds of wild parrots in Brooklyn.
They are on transformers.
On utility poles, trees, living in big, warm nests that are basically apartments, multiple dwellings.
I mean, I know they come from Argentina, but we know how they got here? The rumor is that a crate burst open at the old Idlewild Airport, and they escaped and began colonizing Brooklyn.
Oh, these are airport birds?
That's what they say.
But in Brooklyn, the people,
Move the damn car!
the neighbors, even the other birds are very tough. And yet somehow, for 40 years, these parrots, who are so tender with each other, have prospered because, says ornithologist Mark Spryer, they are even tougher.
They've got to look over their shoulder for predators. They've got to find food. They've got to stay warm. I mean, they have to be tough birds.
Especially when they compete with pigeons for food and territory.
The pigeons would just scurry away to the fire escape.
Kate, for example, saw parrots dive-bombing pigeons on her block.
Yeah. That's what they were doing.
Pecking or just bombing?
Just bombing, no pecking.
And they are fearless. I met this dog, Speedy. He weighs 170 times more than any parrot. And this woman says she bought Speedy from the neighborhood drug dealer.
He's a criminal dog, yes.
And yet the parrots regularly dive-bomb Speedy.
Wait a minute, if there were parrots in this street and he knew it, what would he do?
He would slink along the side of the fence so he would get away from them.
So this dog, who used to work for drug dealers, is afraid of parrots?
Yes, he is.
In Brooklyn, as any dog or any parrot will tell you, it's all about respect. I'm Robert Krulwich.
Nova is a production of WGBH Boston.
We are PBS.